Warning, this episode may contain disturbing content, soothing narration, and mild existential dread. Basically, murder ASMR for stressed professionals. Listener discretion is advised. Hell, it might be necessary.
There are certain things you expect a river to embody. Wetness, for example, that's usually pretty high on the list.
Water.
Explosive and on fire generally ranks much lower. But today I'm bringing you a story that could only come from Ohio. Okay, technically it could have come from a lot of industrial cities during the Industrial Revolution, but Ohio really committed to the bit by setting the Cuyahoga River on fire so many times that historians eventually lost count. And honestly, that's impressive for a river. Most rivers contribute fish or transportation to society. The Cuyahoga contributed flames, and water so polluted, Cleveland responded by building massive water tunnels beneath Lake Erie just to keep people hydrated, a project that also somehow involved fire and explosions. So today I'm going to tell you how Cleveland managed to burn water and explode water tunnels too. Because for the 2-year anniversary of Crime to Burn, we're celebrating the only way we feel is appropriate. With industrial disasters, environmental negligence, flaming waterways, underground explosions, and enough chemical contamination to trauma bond an entire city. Because if there's one thing this episode has taught me, it's that humans will absolutely look at a body of water actively burning and still say, yeah, but think about the economy. And don't think for 1 second that Cleveland was alone in this. Chicago, Baltimore, Buffalo, Detroit. Honestly, at the height of the Industrial Revolution, America looked at every available waterway and collectively decided, what if we poured chemicals directly into this? And everyone acted shocked when the rivers started fighting back. Until one particular fire on the Cuyahoga ignited an environmental firestorm that transformed Cleveland from the city where the river burns into the city that rocks. So join me from the depths of my sleep-deprived little raccoon soul as we journey into the beautiful nightmare landscape of industrial sludge, exploding water tunnels, poisoned rivers, offshore intake cribs, and waterways so polluted that the primary concern wasn't drowning so much as chemical dissolution. This is River of Ruin, the Cuyahoga Fires, right here on Crime to Burn. Welcome to Crime to Burn, where we explore the dark city landscape where true crime intersects with arson and criminal negligence. Join us as we sift through the ashes to bring you the story of what really happened. Welcome back to Crime to Burn. I'm April, a fire protection engineer, former firefighter, and your captain on this unhinged little cruise through dark history.
And I'm wearing so many hats, they started calling me Hat Rack in the streets.
And if you're new here, welcome aboard. Today is our 2-year podiversary. It has officially been 2 years since we relaunched Crime to Burn back in June of 2024, and honestly, what a strange, chaotic little ride it's been. Before we dive into today's industrial nightmare, we need one tiny and completely free favor from you. Go leave us a 5-star rating on your podcast player, and if your app allows it, a written review or episode comment would be greatly appreciated. That engagement helps us tremendously with discoverability because Mama spent all our advertising money repairing the catastrophic water damage ceiling collapse currently consuming our home. And for those of you checking in, yes, repairs are still ongoing. Yes, we are exhausted. And yes, I currently live inside what feels like an active construction documentary. Apple Podcasts and Spotify ratings help the most with discoverability, but honestly, we appreciate ratings anywhere. We're up to 77 ratings on Apple Podcasts, and a huge thank you to Jersey Girl in Vermont and Glory B563 for leaving reviews. We genuinely appreciate you taking the time. Over on Spotify, we're up to 74 ratings. Unfortunately, Spotify refuses to tell me who any of you are, but thank you, mysterious rating goblins. And a huge thank you as well to Reverend Karis Dudek for your Spotify comment praising our outtakes, and D-Money for wishing us painless home repairs. D-Money, they are not painless, but they are progressing, and so we appreciate the optimism. And over on Podbean, thank you to Rena Grotke, I think is how you say it. Rena Grotke, Deborah Hamilton, Becky Beasley, Han, Tinky Holtzhausen, and Sophie Brown for your comments. I have fallen way behind on replies, but I do read every single one. So thank you for spending part of your day yelling into the crime to burn void with us. And also thank you to Heather Hanlon. We missed you last week too. Now, you never have to support us financially because this show will always be free and supported by ads, but if you'd like to support the show directly, you'll find a link in the show notes for the Cult of Steve, where you can get your episodes ad-free, along with exclusive sticker drops and other increasingly unhinged nonsense. Likewise, if you'd like merch, we strongly encourage that behavior. That link is also in the show notes. Now, since I've been on vacation, I've been mysteriously absent from social media because apparently I believed I could fit 6 months of productivity into 5 vacation days, which has gone about as well as you would expect, but I will return soon. So if you give us a follow over on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, X, or TikTok, we'd really appreciate it. And even more helpful than following us is liking, commenting, sharing, saving, or interacting with our content in any way that you can, because the algorithm currently has creators our size locked in what feels like an administrative hostage situation. And as always, if you have case suggestions, fire stories, episode feedback, or emotional support to offer while we continue ripping apart our ceiling, you can email us anytime at crimetoburn@gmail.com. We were still ripping it apart when I wrote this episode. I know we're past that now.
I'd be happy to know I have it pretty much tied in.
Yeah. We're ready to now
Continue with the laminates.
continue. And definitely stay tuned for the outtakes at the end for a story about one completely bat-poop crazy fire call, because I stumbled upon it quite accidentally and it is just too good not to share. Now, let's talk about the time Cleveland accidentally turned a river into a recurring fire hazard. Long before the days of the EPA, and for our listeners outside the United States, that's the Environmental Protection Agency, the Industrial Revolution absolutely ravaged American waterways. Cleveland wasn't alone in turning rivers into chemical soup. Chicago screwed theirs up so badly that engineers eventually reversed the flow of the entire Chicago River so they could send their industrial sludge away from the city and directly toward Lake Michigan instead, which was incredibly generous of them to share with everyone else. And Chicago wasn't alone. It seems that across industrial America, the primary solution to pollution was simply make it everyone's problem. But in Cleveland, the problem wasn't going anywhere. You see, Cleveland sits along the wonderfully useful Cuyahoga River, a river connecting the city directly to Lake Erie. And as Cleveland climbed the greasy ladder of industrial prosperity, the Cuyahoga became critical to that growth, serving as a major transportation route for raw materials, manufactured goods, oil, steel, lumber, and basically anything else industrial America could shove onto a boat. The river served another important industrial purpose too, a place to dump waste. And before you give industry too much side-eye here, they weren't the only culprits, because cities themselves were also using rivers as giant open sewers. Human waste, industrial waste, chemical runoff, dead animals, oil slicks, basically just vibes and contamination. The prevailing philosophy at the time seemed to be, if you add enough water, it'll stop being gross. Narrator voice, it did not stop being gross.
Dilution is nature's filter.
Instead, it started becoming flammable. And I know what you're thinking. A flammable river? Water is famously difficult to set on fire. And you're not wrong. Ordinarily, water is what we use to put fires out. But when the surface of that water becomes coated in such a dense layer of oil, industrial runoff, chemicals, and floating debris that some witnesses claimed the river no longer flowed but just oozed, well, that floating layer of sludge acts as fuel while the water underneath becomes largely irrelevant. And so the Cuyahoga River developed a recurring problem. It kept catching fire. The first documented river fire occurred in 1868, which you would think might serve as a massive warning sign that something had gone catastrophically wrong, because traditionally speaking, rivers don't burn. But remarkably, almost nobody really cared. And it wasn't because it only happened once. Oh no. The Cuyahoga River caught fire at least 13 documented times.
What year was this?
We're starting at 1868.
Wow, we had already polluted it that bad?
Yeah.
That is messed up, man. I thought you were going to say it was like the 40s or 50s or something. People always be throwing their trash wherever back then, you know, and you wouldn't care. They didn't understand that actions had consequences or something.
No, they didn't. We're going to talk about some actions and some consequences.
But man, that's a long time ago.
Almost nobody really cared, and it wasn't because it only happened once. Oh no. The Cuyahoga River caught fire at least 13 documented times, possibly more. It happened so frequently that newspapers often mentioned river fires casually, almost like weather reports or traffic updates. At some point, Cleveland collectively developed an attitude of, oh hell, the river's on fire again. And honestly, that may be one of the most industrial revolution sentences ever spoken. And when people did question why the river had become a flammable stew of oil slicks and industrial waste, politicians responded with something that can best be summarized as, well, yeah, but business is booming. The pollution, they argued, was simply the cost of prosperity, the cost of industrialization, the cost of jobs, the cost of economic growth. Sure, the city smelled terrible. Sure, the river occasionally burst into flames. And sure, the water increasingly resembled an industrial soup stock pot. But apparently, that was considered a small price to pay for progress and prosperity, which raises an important question. Just how bad does the pollution have to get before prosperity stops feeling worth it? Because apparently, that point is somewhere beyond the river catching fire, the city smelling terrible, and industrial waste coating the water so thickly that it no longer flowed, it just oozed. So where exactly was Cleveland getting its drinking water? I'll give you one guess.
I hope they're collecting rainwater.
And it's going to make your stomach turn. Cleveland got its drinking water from Lake Erie, which is the lake that the Cuyahoga River empties into. At the time, Cleveland's water intakes were relatively close to shore and fairly shallow and uncomfortably close to sewage discharge, industrial runoff, oil contamination, and all of the pollution that was pouring out of the river itself. It was basically a system that said, dump your contamination here and collect your drinking water slightly over there, which, unsurprisingly, worked poorly. You could call it an act of extreme municipal optimism. But after that first 1868 fire, industrialization along the waterfront only intensified. And honestly, I have to imagine that if you were looking to build a business producing massive amounts of toxic waste, a city that barely reacted when its river caught fire probably seemed like an excellent place to avoid too much scrutiny. In fact, the mayor had specifically said, out loud, in speeches, that the toxic waste and pollution in the river was a good sign of the city's economic prosperity.
What? And people believed it. They're like, oh, that makes all the sense in the world. Here, have half my money. Please do it more.
So, in 1883, the river caught fire again, and again in 1887. Now, at this point, rumors began circulating that if somebody fell into the Cuyahoga River, they were less likely to drown than they were to be chemically dissolved. Which sounds dramatic, until you start looking at what was actually being dumped into the water. In one documentary, they actually reported that dock workers claimed that the metal buttons on their clothing would visibly corrode within a week from exposure to the environment around the river. And they had pictures of dock workers' metal buttons.
Yeah, but you said dissolving your body.
Yeah,
that's real, like you...
There's no documented cases of somebody falling in the river and dissolving, but the idea what people would say was that look what it does to metal, so what would it do to a human body? That was like
what salt does to metal, and
that was the sort of threat around the docks for to scare the new kids. Like if you fall in, you'll just dissolve.
It's like, what was that goop in Who Framed Roger Rabbit?
Oh, I don't know. I don't remember. I haven't seen that movie.
The dip.
I don't remember that.
You quit being a cartoon, you fall in there.
So that feels less like a river and more like Satan's soup. And if there's one place you probably don't want to get your drinking water from, it's Satan's soup pot. So in 1856, Cleveland started thinking about water a little more rationally, and they built a 300-foot-long cast iron intake pipe extending out into Lake Erie. The idea was move the drinking water intake just a little further away from where the Cuyahoga River was dumping all of its industrial sludge, which was some slight improvement. But by the 1870s, a 300-foot pipe didn't really inspire confidence when the same lake was still receiving sewage, industrial runoff, oil contamination, and whatever fresh chemical surprise happened to be flowing down the Cuyahoga that week. So Cleveland decided to undertake a much larger project. Engineers would build an offshore intake crib nearly 9,000 feet from shore and connect it to the city through a tunnel excavated beneath the lake bed. The intake crib itself was essentially a small structure rising above the surface of the lake, and below the water line were intake openings designed to draw water from beneath the surface, helping to avoid all that floating debris and contamination. And that water would then travel down a vertical shaft into the tunnels beneath Lake Erie and travel all the way back to shore where it could be pumped into the city's water system. It was a very ambitious feat of engineering for this time. It was also incredibly dangerous. Because anytime you're digging underground, especially beneath a lake, you're gambling with whatever happens to be trapped in the earth around you. And sometimes what happens to be trapped underground is gas, flammable gas. So during construction of the first tunnel, 2 workers reportedly detected the smell of gas and went to investigate. Needing more light, one of them struck a match.
They went to investigate a gas smell?
Mm-hmm.
And struck a match.
Mm-hmm. So that's one of those moments in history where every modern listener immediately knows exactly how that story ended. The resulting explosion killed both men. But gas wasn't the only danger. Workers also faced cave-ins, flooding, and something that engineers and physicians of the era only partially understood: caisson sickness. The tunnel crews worked inside pressurized chambers designed to keep the water from flooding the excavation. The higher pressure allowed them to work beneath the lake, but it came with a hidden cost. After spending hours in those pressurized environments, workers would return to the surface and develop severe pain, sometimes paralysis, and sometimes even death. Now, today we know exactly what was happening. The pressure was forcing gases to dissolve in their blood and tissues, and when they returned to normal pressure too quickly, those gases formed bubbles inside the body. Modern divers call this decompression sickness.
The bends.
Back then they called it caisson disease, and most of us simply know it today as the bends. And then, on May 11th, 1898, Cleveland's waterworks project reached an entirely new level of disaster. Workers were excavating a new tunnel beneath Lake Erie, and they were roughly 6,300 feet offshore when they struck a pocket of natural gas. The gas ignited, and the tunnel exploded. Somehow, 8 horribly burned workers managed to survive the initial blast and crawl nearly 2,000 feet back through the tunnel toward shore.
Whoa. How many feet are in a mile?
5,000?
It's like half a mile or something?
There are 5,280 feet in a mile.
That's roughly half a mile.
Yeah. So they crawled 2,000 feet back through the tunnel toward shore, where fellow workers were finally able to reach them and drag them to safety. Miraculously, they had escaped the tunnel, but tragically, all 8 of them later died from their burns. And because apparently the universe felt Cleveland had not yet received enough warning signs, the exact same tunnel exploded again just 2 months later. On July 11th, 1898, another gas explosion ripped through the excavation, killing 11 more workers. At that point, even Cleveland had apparently reached its limit. The damaged tunnel was sealed off with a bulkhead, and engineers abandoned the original approach. Instead, workers began excavating toward shore from 2 new intake cribs. Now, I would like to pause and point out something remarkable. 2 explosions in a tunnel were apparently sufficient evidence that a different plan might be warranted. But multiple river fires had somehow failed to clear the same threshold. An exploding tunnel, unacceptable. A burning river, apparently just part of Cleveland's charm. But Cleveland's water tunnel saga wasn't finished trying to kill people. On August 14th, 1901, one of those new intake cribs caught fire, and 5 men aboard the crib were killed by the flames. And 5 more jumped into Lake Erie to escape and tragically drowned. And if you're keeping score at home, that means Cleveland now has managed to combine a water supply project with fire deaths, explosion deaths, cave-ins, gas poisoning, decompression sickness, and drowning, which is an impressively diverse safety record. But then something extraordinary happened. 6 days after the fire, a worker named Gustav Van Duzen was helping repair the damaged crib when he heard a faint tapping sound coming from the shaft below. This was 6 days after the fire. At first, he probably thought he was imagining it, but Van Duzen and other workers decided to go and investigate. So they descended into the crib and discovered 2 survivors. The men had been trapped below since the fire for 6 days. Too weak to escape and overcome by the gas, they had remained underground for almost a week. Yet somehow they were still alive, and remarkably, they were rescued. Unfortunately, Cleveland's water project was not done generating headlines, because just 2 days after those men were pulled to safety, another gas explosion ripped through the other new tunnel. This time, 6 workers were killed. And then, because apparently nobody had informed the tunnel that repeated explosions were considered undesirable, the same tunnel exploded again in December of 1902. 4 more workers died. At this point, it was becoming increasingly apparent that abandoning a tunnel after 2 explosions and moving to a new location was not actually solving the underlying problem. The explosions, unfortunately, seemed quite willing to relocate. But, safety records be damned, in 1904, Cleveland finally completed the massive offshore intake tunnel project, and to be fair, it worked. The city now had access to cleaner water drawn far from shore and away from the contamination that was pouring into Lake Erie from the Cuyahoga River and the city's industrial waterfront. So I guess bravo Cleveland, you got cleaner drinking water. And all it cost was years of construction, multiple explosions, fires, cave-ins, decompression sickness, gas poisoning, drownings, and a body count that was becoming difficult to keep track of. But hey, the water was cleaner, which I'm sure was a tremendous comfort to the ghosts of all the men sacrificed in the process. But apparently the Cuyahoga River became jealous of all the attention Cleveland's waterworks project was receiving, because in 1912, the river caught fire again. At this point, Cleveland had spent decades alternating between exploding tunnels and burning waterways, and remarkably, neither seemed sufficient to trigger any kind of meaningful change. The fires had become normal. The pollution was normal. The smell was normal. Burning rivers and exploding tunnels were simply part of the background noise of an industrial city convinced that prosperity was worth almost any price. But with the apparent success of Cleveland's offshore water intake system, the city decided that the obvious next step was more cribs. So in August 1914, construction began on water crib number 5. This new intake would sit roughly 5 miles north of the mouth of the Cuyahoga River in Lake Erie. And the plan was to extend and connect the existing tunnel network all the way out to the new crib, because generally speaking, the farther your drinking water is from the giant industrial sludge fountain, the better. Engineers would excavate from both directions. One crew would work outward from crib number 4, and the other crew would work inward from crib number 5. The 2 tunnels would eventually meet somewhere beneath the lake bed. And honestly, everything seemed to be going remarkably well. Well by Cleveland Waterworks standards. I mean, workers were still dealing with caisson sickness. They were still tunneling beneath a Great Lake. They were still one bad decision away from discovering an explosive gas pocket, but compared to the previous projects, things were downright tranquil. In fact, for nearly 2 years of this project, nobody died. Now, ordinarily, we haven't killed anyone this year would be considered the absolute bare minimum benchmark for a successful construction project. But by Cleveland water tunnel standards, this was apparently worthy of celebration. There was genuine pride that this project had managed to go almost 2 full years without a fatality. Unfortunately, that streak came to an end on July 24th, 1916. But before we get to the disaster itself, let's talk about how all of this actually worked. Because crib number 5 wasn't just offshore, it was way offshore, roughly 5 miles from shore. And because commuting 5 miles across Lake Erie every day was deemed wildly impractical, the workers essentially lived on the crib for months at a time. About 85 men called this 100-foot steel structure home. They worked 3 8-hour shifts. So they had 8 hours working, 8 hours sleeping, and 8 hours for recreation. Which sounds reasonable until you remember they were living on a steel platform in the middle of Lake Erie with no telephone, no telegraph, and no radio.
What's the recreation here?
I don't know.
Checkers and
Cards, I guess.
awful card games. Missing the 2 diamonds. God.
Now, engineers had tried running telephone lines to the earlier cribs, but boat anchors kept tearing them apart. So for crib number 5, they just gave up. Communication with shore was limited to whistles, signal flares, the occasional boat, and just hoping somebody noticed if they needed attention. Beneath the crib, workers were excavating a 10-foot diameter tunnel lined with interlocking concrete blocks. There was a small railway car that ran from the bottom of the shaft to the tunnel face. There, a large drilling machine chewed its way forward through the lake bed, while the workers loaded the excavated material into the rail cars. Those cars were hauled back to the shaft, lifted to the surface, and dumped into Lake Erie.
That's a lot of innuendo words in a row.
But this dumping wasn't laziness. The material was intended to actually help stabilize the crib itself against the lake floor.
That's how I was thinking about it.
Meanwhile, the workers at crib number 4 had begun reporting something concerning. Gas. Lots of gas. Workers complained that the fumes were making them dizzy, nauseated, and at times too impaired to work effectively. Now, if you've listened to enough episodes of the show, you already know what comes next, because whenever workers start reporting symptoms, management faces a critical choice. Investigate the problem or convince themselves it will probably be fine. History suggests you can already guess which option was selected. On July 22, 1916, a worker actually witnessed a sudden rupture nearly a foot wide open in the tunnel floor, and gas poured into the tunnel. The concentration became so severe that by Monday morning, every single worker assigned to the tunnel flatly refused to enter it. Every single one. This was an extraordinarily bad sign. So finally, air samples were collected and plans were started to repair a ventilation system capable of actually removing the gas from the tunnel, which sounds encouraging. Except that before the samples could be analyzed and before the ventilation system could be repaired or upgraded, somebody somewhere decided that, the gas has probably dissipated enough by now from the underground tunnel, and the night crew was ordered back underground.
We sent Tommy down there. He didn't smell any farts.
At 9:22 p.m., workers monitoring the compressors and pressure gauges noticed something strange. The tunnel was normally maintained at approximately 22 pounds per square inch, 22 psi. Suddenly, their pressure gauges surged to 30 and then immediately crashed to 5. To the men watching the gauges, it was obvious that something catastrophic had happened. Then, they reported the strong smell of gas.
So, why did their gauges fluctuate like that?
Because they had an explosion. So it spiked to 30 during the explosion, the tunnel partially ruptured and released the pressure back down to 5 psi. Yeah, it was a big explosion. The tunnel crew was trapped, and rescuers immediately entered through the airlock, but they barely made it inside. The 8 men that attempted the rescue, only 3 made it back to the airlock. The others collapsed almost immediately after entering the gas-filled tunnel. Above them, the crib's steam whistle began blasting the distress signal, 5 short blasts, again and again and again, and signal rockets were fired into the sky. Remember, there was no radio and no telephone and no simple way to call for help. A life-saving station on shore was supposed to monitor for exactly these kinds of emergencies. But that night, a very thick fog blanketed the lake, and the signals went unseen and the whistle went unheard for hours. In one of the strangest twists of the story, it was actually a Cleveland resident that happened to be outside and noticed one of the signal rockets and heard the whistle and called the life-saving station himself. Only then did help begin moving toward the crib. By the time rescue boats arrived around midnight, nearly 3 hours had passed, but there was a new problem. Nobody had any equipment capable of entering a gas-filled tunnel. Then a familiar name appeared, Gustav van Dusen.
They're like, if anyone can enter a gas-filled tunnel, it's this guy.
This was the same man who years earlier had discovered those 2 workers still alive 6 days after the crib fire. So Van Dusen assembled a volunteer rescue team of 12 men, and a backup team of 5 more stood ready behind them. The rescue attempt lasted only moments. The gas drove them back almost immediately, and multiple additional attempts also failed.
That's some pretty bad gas.
Rescuers just kept collapsing before they could reach any of the trapped workers. Then, shortly before 5 in the morning, help arrived from an unexpected source, a man named Garrett Morgan. Morgan had recently invented a new breathing device designed to allow users to survive in smoke and toxic atmospheres. Today, we would recognize it as an early gas mask. Morgan and 3 volunteers donned the devices and entered the tunnel. For the first time since the disaster began, rescuers could actually reach the victims. They searched the tunnel and recovered every worker that they could find. Some were dead, some were alive, but when it was over, 19 men were counted as dead, and 9 more were injured. And once again, Cleveland's seemingly cursed water tunnel project had added another chapter to its already astonishing body count. Now, there were investigations after this 1916 disaster. There were inquests, accusations of negligence. There was absolutely negligence. And there were arguments about who knew what and when they knew it, and whether the workers had been sent into dangerous tunnels despite obvious and clear warnings. And in what was becoming a reoccurring theme in Cleveland history, none of it really seemed to go anywhere. Life just moved on. And the tunnels were eventually completed, and the water kept flowing and the river kept burning. The Cuyahoga caught fire again in 1936, and again in 1941, and again in 1948. And remarkably, none of those fires generated much outrage, because by this point, river fires just weren't shocking, they were expected. The Cuyahoga had become so polluted and so routinely combustible that a fire on the river barely qualified as noteworthy anymore. Imagine trying to explain that sentence to a modern audience. Yes, our river caught fire again. Again? Again. And then came the fire that should have changed everything, except it didn't, at least not immediately. In 1952, the Cuyahoga erupted into one of the largest river fires in history. This wasn't some small patch of burning oil beneath a bridge. This was a major industrial fire. The blaze caused more than $1 million of damage in 1952 money. Boats burned, bridges burned, riverfront infrastructure burned. This fire tore through the industrial corridor in spectacular fashion. By any reasonable standard, it was a disaster. The sort of event that should have forced an entire nation to stop and ask, what the hell is happening in Cleveland? But it didn't. The fire made the local news, not much really in the national news, because the uncomfortable reality was that the Cuyahoga had been catching fire for decades. To Cleveland, this just was not a shocking new development. It was just a Tuesday. It was a river that burned so often that one of the largest river fires in American history barely managed to move the needle. Between 1949 and 1961, at least 4 more fires burned on the Cuyahoga River. And once again, they barely registered as disasters or even noteworthy. To many people, this was just the cost of prosperity, the cost of steel, shipping, industry. The river burned because the economy was booming. At least, that was the argument. But by the 1960s, something else was beginning to gain momentum. The environmental movement. And every movement needs a symbol, a poster child, a visual that captures the problems in a way statistics just never can. And the environmental movement was about to find one, sort of. Because the creation of the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, is tied, at least in part, to a photograph of the wrong fire. On June 22, 1969, the most famous Cuyahoga River fire occurred. An oil slick ignited beneath railroad trestles, causing localized damage. It was a real fire, but compared to some of those earlier blazes, it was relatively small. In fact, it was nowhere near as destructive as the massive 1952 fire that caused more than $1 million worth of damage. This one was estimated somewhere between $50,000 and $60,000 worth of damage, to give you an idea of scale.
My eyebrow is very high right now. That's not very much money.
All it did was damage 2 railroad trestles.
Oh, okay.
And this is where things get interesting. You see, at the time, Cleveland Mayor Carl Stokes was actively pushing for environmental reform. Public concern about pollution was starting to grow, and national attention was beginning to focus on environmental issues. And then, Time magazine published a story about that June 1969 river fire. But the photograph they used was not from the 1969 fire. It was a photograph from the massive 1952 fire, that really dramatic one. The one with the towering flames and catastrophic damage. Now, whether the photograph was used because editors believed it depicted the 1969 fire, or because virtually nobody had photographed the relatively routine 1969 fire, is still debated. But either way, the result was the same. Americans saw an image of a river that appeared to be absolutely engulfed in flames, and it was horrifying. And even then, under normal conditions, this story might have just faded into the background. Except that this particular issue of Time magazine arrived during one of the biggest news events in American history, Apollo 11. millions of Americans were paying attention. Millions of Americans bought that issue of Time magazine. Millions of people who otherwise might have never heard about the Cuyahoga River suddenly saw a photograph of what looked like an environmental apocalypse.
Well, this is refreshing because usually headlines like that obscure an event like that.
And just like that, the river became a symbol. The image helped galvanize support for environmental reform. It contributed to the growing public pressure for stronger environmental protections. And in the years that followed, the United States created the Environmental Protection Agency, which passed landmark legislation, including the Clean Water Act, which means that one of the most influential environmental images in American history was a mislabeled photograph of a different fire. It was a photograph that had been taken 17 years earlier. Fortunately, though, the reforms worked. By the time cleanup efforts seriously began, the Cuyahoga was effectively biologically dead. There were no fish in it, aquatic vegetation was absolutely gone, and the river's ecosystem had completely collapsed. But over the following decades, the river has slowly recovered. Fish have returned, plants have returned, wildlife has returned. And today, the Cuyahoga River is considered one of the greatest environmental recovery stories in the United States, which is genuinely remarkable when you consider that we spent most of this episode discussing it as a flammable chemical ditch. And perhaps most importantly, Cleveland's drinking water no longer comes directly from the Devil's Anus. And finally, this is our 2-year podiversary, which means this would normally be the part where I tell you how celebratory things have been around here. Unfortunately, that would be a lie. Y'all know we recently had flooding and a ceiling collapse, but what you don't know is that while we're still dealing with that mess, life apparently looked at our stress level and said, not enough. So another issue popped up, the kind that we're desperately trying to get resolved, but the person that we believe is in the wrong here is not seeing things clearly, and there's a very real possibility that we're going to have to let people in very expensive suits take over pursuing remedy for that which we have suffered. In other words, I don't want to land in court, but I'm willing to, because it was that messed up. And so, as to not damage any potential pending litigation, to resolve the issue, I cannot yet fill you in on the deets. But let's just say things around the Crime to Burn household have been significantly less festive than I imagined our 2-year podiversary would be.
But that doesn't mean we're not grateful.
That doesn't mean we're not grateful. It's just been one of those stretches where every time you solve one problem, another one appears carrying a folding chair. So, instead of ending this episode with stress, I decided to go looking for something funny. And in the process, I stumbled across one of the most absolutely batshit insane fire department calls that I've personally ever heard about. And I had somehow never encountered this story before, which is honestly a tragedy, because once I heard it, I immediately became convinced that it needed to be shared with the rest of humanity. So gather round, children. Let me tell you about the fire call that made me stop and say, there's absolutely no way this happened. Except apparently it did. This story that I'm reading comes from a post by the resident of the home where the call occurred. However, I have confirmed through multiple news sources, and you can Google this, it happened, that this is a true story. Every detail here is true. Are you ready? Here's what he writes. I recently took a girl I met on Tinder to Nando's. We had a lovely evening and enjoyed each other's company very much. After our meal, we repaired back to my house for a bottle of wine and a Scientology documentary.
Oh, God. He repaired back to his house to watch a Scientology documentary. Was this man Tom Cruise?
No.
Was it the other fucking guy?
This man's name was Liam Smith.
So not John Travolta.
No. About an hour in, my date got up to use the toilet. She returned with a panicked look in her eye, and she told me she had something to tell me. Quote, I went for a poo in your toilet, she told me, and it would not flush. I don't know why I did this, but I panicked, she continued. I reached into the toilet bowl, wrapped it in tissue paper, and threw it out of the window. I was understandably concerned and told her we would go outside, bag it up.
What?
Wait.
That's a really understanding date right there. What the f*** you did what? No, it's okay. We'll go bag it up. Don't worry.
I was understandably concerned and told her we would go outside, bag up the offending poo in the garden, bin it, and pretend the whole sorry affair had never happened.
Oh, so they're in England.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, owing to a design quirk of my house, the toilet window does not, in fact, open to the garden, but instead into a narrow gap of about 1.5 feet separated from the outside world by another, non-opening double-glazed window. It was into this twilight zone that my date had thrown her poo.
Dude, who even tells this story?
As can be seen in the picture, which I will show you.
Oh, no, I don't want to see a picture of poop.
No, it's a picture of the window.
With poop on it.
No. As can be seen in the picture, the inside window opens at the top into the gap that is separated from the garden by a non-opening double-glazed window pane. Seeing only one solution, I messaged our house group chat and went upstairs to find a hammer and chisel to smash out the window.
How many people live in your house?
My date had other ideas. Being an amateur gymnast, she was convinced that she could reach into the window and pull the poo out, using the tried and tested inside-out bag as a glove technique. Unfortunately, she couldn't reach, so she climbed further in and had the same problem. Eventually, I agreed to give her a boost up and into the window. She climbed in head first after her own turd, reached deeper into the window, bagged it up, passed it out, over the top back into the toilet from whence it came. She called out to me to help her climb back out from the window. I grabbed her waist and pulled. But she was stuck. Very stuck. Try as we might, we could not remove her from the window. She was stuck fast upside down in the gap. Unfortunately for my date, at this stage, I could only see one way out of our predicament. She had been upside down in the window for around 15 minutes at this point, and I was starting to grow concerned for her health. I called the fire brigade. Bristol's finest were on scene, sirens blaring in a matter of minutes. Once they had composed themselves after surveying the scene in front of them, they set to work removing my date from the window using all of their special fireman hammers and tools, and it took them about 15 minutes. Unfortunately, although they rescued my date unharmed from what must have been a rather unpleasant confined space to find herself in the process they had to completely destroy my window with their special fire tools. And I'm not complaining, they did what they had to do. The problem is I've been quoted north of 300 pounds to replace the window, and as a postgraduate student, that's a significant chunk of my monthly budget. In fact, that is my entire monthly budget. So I'm turning to the internet for help. So anyway, he put up this story on a GoFundMe looking for his friends to chip in a couple dollars, help him replace the window. Turned out a local business saw the story, the news feed picked it up, it became very popular over there, and a local business stepped in and replaced the window, and all the money that this GoFundMe raised was split between two charities, one being the fire service and the other one being a charity called Toilet Twinning that helps provide toilets to developing countries where they don't have sanitary toilet facilities.
That's pretty cool. Oh, that's pretty cool.
It was pretty cool.
But I still have questions.
So,
I forgot the premise of this. Why did she even tell someone? I don't even want to know why she got panicked and did what she did. I want to know why she mentioned it.
Because the poo was right outside this window that opens at the top and the outside, and so it would have just continued stinking and festering inside this gap. You could see it from inside. She didn't realize that it was between the
window. So I thought it fell down into an alley or something. What am I looking at here?
That's her upside down in the window. So this is the window.
So why, again, did she remove the poo?
So it's between two windows.
No, from the toilet.
Oh,
it was already in the toilet, and it ended up back in the toilet at the end of the day, right?
The toilet wouldn't flush, and she didn't want to have to go tell her date that she dropped a deuce she couldn't flush away and have him fix it. So she thought, I'll just toss it out the window. That'll be better.
She wasn't sure if he had a poop knife.
I guess. So anyway, here's a picture. You can see her legs up here, and she's stuck in the window.
I'm glad they gave the money to charity, because this seems really unlikely.
It's not, though. See, there's the firefighters there.
Oh, no, they're the brigade.
Oh, yeah, the brigade. Anyway, I thought the way he told the story was very nice. He didn't give away her identity, and he actually says he asked her permission to post this before he did, and she agreed. But what I want to know is, did you go out with her again?
No.
I'm guessing not, but I'm curious, because he seemed very understanding about the whole thing. I think if you told me you were throwing poop out my windows, I probably...
It wasn't because of that. It was because he called the fire brigade. It was her choice.
Maybe?
I'm inventing things, imaginary things. I
don't
really have a clue.
So yeah, that's the craziest fire call I've heard in a long time. I'm sure there's other crazier ones, but if you have a crazy fire call that's going to make everyone laugh, please email us at crimetoburn@gmail.com. And thank you guys so much for being with us for 2 incredible years since our relaunch. And I hope you're not having any home improvement nightmares.
It's not really a nightmare. You know what?
It's not.
We have some people call them problems. They're just issues.
We're having issues.
We have solutions for issues. It's fine. I don't want people to get the wrong idea, like we're not grateful for everything. Like,
oh no, I'm very grateful for everything. It does seem like the timing is a little inconvenient, but in the future, we're going to look back on this and laugh when I'm not so stressed out about it.
This isn't what you call suffering.
No, it's not.
Not even close. Every problem has a solution. It just takes time and energy.
At least our river's not on fire.
Nothing's on fire.
Absolutely nothing.
I'm not just burning doing the neutron dance.
I brought alcohol.
No.
Because I'm still on vacation. Where's dog? There's no sound of licking.
I finally saw that possum you've been finding.
Yes, and please tell the people,
It is actually a very chunky possum.
Was I
Possibly
exaggerating?
the biggest possum I've ever seen.
I was not exaggerating. It was like a 20-pound possum.
I don't have enough heads for all my hats. I'm going to grow a second head to help me wear these hats. Mulch does not rhyme with lunch. I'm sorry, mulch and lunch don't rhyme.
Trust my...
I'm not going to be rhyming on here. I feel like that's outside of my wheelhouse.
Hang on, I need some wetness in my throat. Hang on, I gotta catch my breath. You need a beer. Yeah. Go get a beer.
Tell me what to do. I'll get 2. Act like you're nice for a minute. Well, now you have track lighting.
Now I have track lighting. Hey, and the cup holders in the car are super clean now.
Well, that's good. They weren't really that dirty before.
Well, they were after we spilled half of a coffee in them.
But I'm glad they're clean again.
With whipped cream and Oreos.
That should have a different word than coffee to describe that. That doesn't seem like coffee. That seems like, what are you, 12?
In a move that illustrates my commitment to not being a responsible parent, when we went to the hardware store...
You do seem deeply committed to this idea.
I let her have M&Ms because we were checking out and I didn't care. I was like, yeah, you can have M&Ms. Then we get in the car and I'm like, did you eat breakfast? And she's like, no. And I'm like, all right, let's go get breakfast. And so I looked and all the local drive-thrus around us stopped serving breakfast at 10:30 and it was 10:24. I'm like, there's no way we're going to make it. But Dunkin' Donuts, not a sponsor, serves breakfast all day. So I was like, let's go there. So we go there and she's like, can I have a donut? And I'm like, oh, I just let her get M&Ms and a donut. And then I order her this iced coffee that to her looks like a milkshake. And she's like, I want one of those too. So I let her get the Oreo iced coffee that she ended up hating and spilled in the cup holders accidentally. And the donut, and she had M&Ms. And then we went to stop by Walmart. And she was
not
like,
a sponsor.
Can I get a Frappuccino since I didn't like my coffee? And I let her. So. So she had a donut, M&Ms, and a Frappuccino for breakfast.
Crushing parenthood right there.
So, and I just told myself, I'm like, it's vacation. It's fine.
We're going to need a vacation from vacation.
I totally need a vacation. That if we just blindfolded her and dropped her off somewhere in the middle of the county in a place that she rides by all the time and took the blindfold off, she would have no idea where she is. Because she's never looking out the windows in the car.
What do you think you do when I'm driving, by the way? Because I'm there and I've noticed.
Enjoy the sweet, sweet freedom of not having to worry about where I'm going.
Mm-hmm. Me thinks I smell a double standard. I'm pretty convinced I wouldn't have to blindfold you. Don't forget to enter your local meat raffle.
What do you want to do to celebrate our podiversary?
You ready to open the Prosecco? That's been in there for 2 years now.
This episode brought to you by the bottle of Prosecco.
It's not champagne.
That we've been saving for a special occasion. We could open the Prosecco. That was in key. Good job.
That's what childhood perfect pitch gets you in adulthood. Oh, man, what are you going to feed me for dinner? Go wash your ass so we can release the Kraken. What? Do I need to send you a sexy text message? Flap your eyebrow wings and fly. Until next week, Don't let your meatloaf, and don't let your be willow.
Okay, I get meatloaf, but be willow? Like, how do you willow?
Well, the joke is that you turned a noun into a verb.
But loaf is a real verb, but is willow also a real verb?
You just got redirected to hell!
Willow can be a verb meaning to make something from willow wood or willow branches, or to weave with willow. The basket was willowed by a local craftsman.
Oh.
The banks were willowed to help prevent erosion.
Well, that makes all the sense in the world, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You'll have to make an executive decision this week. Do we say or don't we? And if we do say does it make us horny? Yes. Go prepare yourself. Bathe her and bring her to me. I love light.
Next week we're going down under, mate.
I like it when you go down under.
All right, that's enough.
Okay.
Crime to Burn is a production of Crime to Burn, LLC, where we light fires in your brain and not your buildings. All rights reserved. Still spiritually parched after this episode? It's okay, Steve believes in cross-pollination. Here's a trailer for a show we think deserves to infiltrate your ear holes, in a good way. Don't forget to leave a 5-star review before you go. Steve is watching.
Looking for your next true crime podcast? Then consider checking out my show, Truly Twisted, wherever you get your podcasts. Hi, my name is Alicia Watson, and each Thursday I will be bringing you a twisted story that is always victim-focused and fact-based. My goal is simple, bringing a voice to the voiceless. So be sure to follow me on Instagram and TikTok at It's Truly Twisted. And for more on my show and other amazing creators, visit fireeyesmedia.com. And in the meantime, remember, you are wanted, you are loved, and you deserve to be here. And I'll see you there.
Fire Eyes Media.